life itself is comprised of elements. These elements, when mixed together, are believed to create living cells, which are the basis of life itself.
The Miller-Urey model assumes that the atmosphere of the primordial Earth was reducing, that is, the atmosphere was hydrogen-rich. However, it is even more misleading than that. In addition to using prebiotic constituents such as water, hydrogen, methane, and ammonia, which are relatively simple compounds, the molecular origin of life paradigm does not explain, for example, how the simplest cell membranes first evolved. In fact, the Miller-Urey model only looks at a fraction of a billionth of the entire chain of DNA, and yet says that we went from A to Z without anything in between.
Information theory would say that this type of code, this type of ordered sequence, this type of information can only be a product of mind, of intelligence. There is no other alternative. So what is George Wald saying here? Even though it shocks his scientific sensibilities, it's that in all areas of study, mind must bring forth information, matter, etc. Matter never brings forth mind. Think about that.
This human person who looked like us, existed millions of years ago, did not evolve from an ape, as we are led to believe in the Darwin theory. Why has this evidence been suppressed, and what kind of evidence have you found to support this?
Well, I'll give you a very good example. Now, one example from historical times is during the California gold rush days, miners were digging tunnels thousands of feet into the sides of mountains. Now, the rock in these mountains is over 10 million years old. So when they were digging these tunnels, they were finding human skeletons, they were finding stone spear points, they were finding mortars and pestles, hundreds of them at dozens of locations. Now, all these were gathered together, reported to the scientific world by J.D. Whitney, who was the state geologist of California. And he published a massive book about them by Harvard University. Harvard University was the publisher. Now, what happened to these artifacts? Why aren't they on display in museums? Why aren't our children taught about them in schools? There was a very powerful anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution named William H. Holmes. And he said to Whitney, you, Dr. Whitney, if you had understood the theory of human evolution as we understand it today, you would have hesitated to announce your conclusion, namely that human beings existed millions of years ago, despite the imposing array of facts with which you were confronted. In other words, simply because the facts didn't fit the theory, the facts had to go, and so did Professor Whitney.
But back then I would imagine that they did not have the scientific procedures to identify the exact age of bones and matter that we have today. So can you be confident that this researcher was able to give a time for these bones that were found?
Yes, we checked with the modern geologists about the age of the deposits. Now, these things continue to be discovered today, for example.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
People talk about the missing link. Where is the link between going from apes, monkeys, gorillas, etc., to being able to develop atomic weaponry and fly in space?
skulls, like footprints or puzzle pieces, can provide clues of progression of our lineage, of our ancestors, show our origins, or can they?
And, according to the numerous skeptics of evolution, there's not enough proof that evolution exists in the first place. In The Evolution Conspiracy, author Lisa A. Shield contends that the theory of evolution has numerous faults, including vague definitions and a failure to meet standard criteria for a fact or a theory.
They believed that the aggregate clumping of bacteria formed the building blocks for life itself. Bacteria became living cells, and then the bacteria, it was able to mix together and replicate life through a process.
Let's start right off, Fuzz, here with a definition. What is the definition, the theory of human evolution right now? Define it for us.
Well, as presented in high school textbooks, it's this idea that humans and chimpanzees and the great apes share a common ancestor that existed roughly 5 to 6 million years ago. And from this ape-like ancestor, two evolutionary tree branches emerged, one leading to the great apes and one leading to modern humans. And the modern human pathway proceeded through a variety of intermediary forms like the Australopithecines and Homo erectus.
All right, let's show them what you're talking about here. Here's the current textbook, state of Tennessee, and California, New York, and other places, and you've got one of these charts where you start off with a little ape-like creature, and you go up to man, all right? And then the other one has to do with the first ape-like creature that they think started the whole ball game, and that is Australopithecines, and you can see the branch over here where you start with the branch, and then you got the different apes, and then you come down to man. So that's their idea. Now, what's this based on? Why do they think this is the way it happened?
Well, what you're seeing in textbooks is an oversimplified view of how evolutionary biologists think human evolution took place. When you actually get into the scientific literature, what you see is actually chaos. It's very clear that there is a variety of different hominid forms that existed in Earth's past history, but evolutionists aren't clear among themselves how many species there were and how those species could have related one to another. Nobody knows which of the Australopithecine species could have given rise to the Homo hominids, the Homo bipedal primates.
Yeah, let's make a list, put the list up on the screen for people to see. They're saying that the Australopithecines started the ball game off at about 4.4 million years ago.
Right. The first true Australopithecines, 4.5 million years ago.
And they got different ones that they found, so
right.
they got different names on them. But
there's
that's
a variety of
the first
species.
Isn't there species even earlier?
Right. Prior to 4.5 million years ago, there are a handful of forms that have been recently discovered in the fossil record that predate the Australopithecines. These all seem to have the ability to walk erect, which is actually kind of curious, because as soon as these hominids appear, you see the ability to walk erect showing up immediately.
We're using the word hominid to mean what?
These ape-like animals that have the ability to walk erect, to walk on 2 feet. Right.
And what's the date for these creatures?
In the neighborhood of 6 to 7 million years in age.
Okay, so we go from that creature before Australopithecines to what? Homo habilis?
Homo habilis is the first Homo bipedal primate.
Okay, 2 million years ago.
Right, and then 1.8 million years ago is Homo erectus.
Okay, and then?
And then we have Neanderthal around 150 to 200,000 years ago, and some evidence indicates they may have actually persisted to around 40,000 years ago in that neighborhood.
Okay, so then, and then after Neanderthals, that's supposed to be the closest link to man, and then we have man showing up where?
There's an explosion of modern human fossils in the 40 to 50,000 year time frame.
Darwin's fears proved to be true soon after his death. The laws of inheritance, discovered by an Austrian botanist, Gregor Mendel, caused Lamarck's and Darwin's assertions to collapse. The science of genetics that developed at the beginning of the 20th century proved that it was not acquired physical traits, but only genes that were transmitted to subsequent generations. This discovery made it clear that a scenario suggesting that acquired traits accumulated from generation to generation and generated different living species was implausible. In other words, there were no inheritable variations for Darwin's proposed mechanism of natural selection to choose from. Subsequently, the theory of evolution as advanced by Darwin has been collapsed early in the 20th century. All the other efforts by evolutionists in the 20th century could do nothing but only confirm that natural selection had no evolutionary power. A famous evolutionist, the English paleontologist Colin Patterson, admitted this when he said, "No one has ever produced a species by mechanisms of natural selection. No one has ever got near it, and most of the current argument in neo-Darwinism is about this question." When it was clear that the mechanism of natural selection proposed by Darwin had no evolutionary power, evolutionists had to make a fundamental change in the theory. In addition to the concept of natural selection, they added a second mechanism called mutation. Mutations are alterations or distortions that take place in the DNA of living beings, mostly as a result of external effects such as radiation or chemical action. The theory of evolution now holds that living things are differentiated from one another and develop as a result of mutations. This cannot be true, for mutations only damage the information in the DNA and give only harm to a living being. No beneficial mutation has yet been observed either in nature or in laboratories. Since mutations do not add new genetic information, it is impossible for living beings to acquire new organs through mutations.
Crystals are amazing. They come in various sizes, shapes, and formulations, thought by the ancient mystics and Egyptians to be able to harness the subconscious and mystical experience itself. We delve deeply into crystals and the mathematics behind them.
Radioactive dating. An element is classified by the number of protons in its nucleus. Isotopes are made by adding or subtracting neutrons from the nucleus of an element. For example, the carbon atom has 6 protons in its nucleus. Carbon-12 is an isotope of carbon with 6 neutrons in its nucleus. The age of a fossil or rock can be estimated by combining the half-life of an isotope with knowledge of its abundance and the abundance of its decay products in a source rock. The common occurrence of carbon-14 in living things combined with a relatively long half-life of about 5,600 years makes carbon-14 a valuable process for dating fossils around 5,000 years old. Anything over 5,000 years requires an important decay process called uranium decay. Uranium isotopes decay by alpha emission and have half-lives ranging from 4.5 to 13.9 billion years. Decay products of uranium are lead and helium. So, in essence, they've been cooking the books. They've been using carbon-14 to date fossils that are well beyond the spectrum of its scope.
If we were to subscribe 100% to the idea of survival of the fittest, isn't it illogical to think that all of a sudden we're completely naked and we're losing all of our fur? I mean, that makes absolutely no sense, because right after we shed our fur, we had to wear furs to keep warm. Had we not worn any furs, we would have frozen to death, we would have died. So the whole idea that we shed all of our hair in order to survive because we were stronger, logically makes no sense.